What's going on, guys? My name is Austin. This is the Bodies of Business podcast. Today, we're going to talk about Brian Chesky for the Positive Influencer series, because honestly, Brian's one of the probably best entrepreneurs to ever be in the game. His company, Airbnb, during this recording, I checked to see what the market cap was, $82 billion, and he's worth roughly $9 to $10 billion. Coming from humble beginnings where both of his parents were social workers, and he went to RISD as a designer and an artist, and now he's worth $9 to $10 billion. I think he has entrepreneured himself to going into the history books as one of the best entrepreneurs around. The other thing I love about Brian is that he tells such good stories. He's one of the best storytellers I think I've ever encountered when it comes to entrepreneurs, because every story he tells, it feels like other entrepreneurs can kind of resonate with the stories he has. And he's probably told them thousands of times. So it's almost like he's doing a stand-up bit. So he makes it funny. He makes it kind of poppy in certain areas. I don't know if poppy is the right word, but he's really good at telling stories. And honestly, it's probably been a skill that he's had to learn very well, because that's how you get people to invest in you. And it's how you get people to believe in your mission, vision, and want to work for you, I'm sure. Anyways, I picked out quite a few stories that he told that really resonated with me, and I thought they were good stories for you, the listener. You can go listen to two of his podcasts that I think are great podcasts to listen to. One, it's actually called Blitzscaling. It's not called Blitzscaling, but if you type in Brian Chesky Blitzscaling on YouTube, he did an interview in about 2015 at Stanford, and that was 6 years after Airbnb had started. And so he was on a rocket ship. Everything's good. You can see it in his face. Like, he's so happy. His stories are just so good from when he started to where he is now. And then he also did a podcast after the pandemic with Lenny and Lenny's podcast in 2024, I think 2013, 2024. And that is a totally different podcast. He has a totally different outlook on life, on business, and all these things, because he just went through a pandemic. His company lost 80% of their revenue. And so he had to completely revamp what was going on with the company, all these other things. But it's interesting to see 6 years of Brian Chesky after the company started, and then basically 17 years after, not 17, 15 years after the company had started, and see the difference in his mood and the way he talks about the company and the way he talks about things. You can tell that he's much younger and like more optimistic in the first one. And then the second one, he's more like, I've been through the ringer, and this is what you need to know before, you start a company that's worth billions of dollars. But the first story I wanted to talk about is the story he talks about moving from LA to San Francisco when his friend asked him to move there because he wanted to start a company with him. And the reason why this story resonated with me is because he started with a problem for why they tried to figure out a company that they wanted to start. He had to pay rent, and he says he only had $1,000 in his bank account, and rent was $1,150. And this was in October of 2007. And so they had to figure out a way to make more money. That's only $150. So he could have gone and driven Uber, but it wasn't around back then. Anyways, and so that was the first thing, is like he starts with the problem first. Like, he couldn't pay rent. How do I pay rent? Well, the way they did it was a conference was coming into town and said people could stay with them because all the hotels were booked. And so they stayed on airbeds. The really interesting thing about that story was they said after they did that, it, went well, and people slept on airbeds, and they turned into wanting to do a roommate matching service for the next 4 months. They didn't even pursue what Airbnb was, but they tried to do a roommate matching service. And then they looked up like roommates.com and found that there was already a roommate matching service. So they're like, we don't need to do this. Anyways, I thought that was interesting, because anytime you start with something, you should start with the problem at hand and focus on the problem. And there's a good book, I think it's called Fall in Love with the Problem. But it just goes to show you that when you have a problem, you're looking for a solution. Don't try to make a product and then find the problem that you want to fix with that solution. So I thought that was interesting and good to hear. One of the funny stories that he always tells is how they built these cereal boxes and actually put cereal in them for the Democratic National Convention for Obama O's and Captain McCain's cereal. And they did this as kind of a last ditch effort to raise money so that they continue to do their startup. And they sold 1,000 boxes for like $30 or $40 for $40 a box. And so they raised like $30,000 or $40,000 by selling the cereal boxes. And that kind of goes into why they actually got into Y Combinator, which is a incubator that started in about 2005. So this is right after Y Combinator had just started. And they said they were pitching the idea of Airbnb to the founder. I can't remember his name right now. Paul Graham, boom, PG. Don't know that guy, but everyone cool calls him PG. And PG said, I don't know about your Airbnb thing, but if you can sell these boxes of cereal for $30 a pop and you can stay alive that way, you guys are cockroaches and you guys are going to make it. You guys are going to make it work. You're going to make some business work. And I thought that was really interesting that it doesn't always have to be that you have a perfect idea. It's just about staying alive and being a cockroach and saying, you know what? I'm never going to die and I'm going to be in a nuclear winter and I'm going to be a cockroach that survives, right? And so I think that's important to understand is a lot of times your original idea is not going to be the thing that actually makes you a lot of money in the end or allows you to continue to pursue your entrepreneur venture. And so you need to understand that and just being able to say, you know what, we need to make enough money just to stay alive, just so we can figure out the next step and the next step and the next step. And you don't have to have it all figured out for you to say, oh, this has to be the perfect idea. So I thought that was very interesting. I loved hearing that story because I feel like for fly bodies, I took that information. I heard this a long time ago. So I was like, you know what? I just got to stay alive. I don't have to make hundreds of thousands of dollars in the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years. As long as I stay alive and I can pay my bills, then I'm good. All right. The next story that Brian tells or one of the stories he tells is he says, one of the quotes he said was, the only difference between being an entrepreneur and unemployed is in your head. And he said his mom said that because he would come home in early days, like 2007, 2008, before they got into Y Combinator, and he'd be like, I'm an entrepreneur. And then she's like, no, you're unemployed. And he's like, no, I'm an entrepreneur. And so it's kind of funny when you think about that, because some people look at you as like, dude, you're only making $30, $40, $50,000 a year. That's terrible. And they're making $100 to $150, maybe $200,000 a year, but they're doing a job that they hate. And I think that's interesting because a lot of times people look at you and value you on the amount of money you make and what you're working on. A lot of people, and don't get me wrong, sometimes if you work on for something so long that you're not making any money, maybe you are unemployed. But don't always put the value of you to the amount of money that you're making in the time, because it just takes a really, really long time to actually create enough value for you to build something that is going to be worth a lot of money. Unless you take funding where you can do that, which a lot of people do, and you can, take on, or you can get funding in order to continue to work on your entrepreneur journey. But if you're not taking funding, it might take you a while to get to a point where you feel super comfortable of your lifestyle and how you live and feel like you're providing enough value. So it might be only in your head that you're an entrepreneur in the beginning, but that's okay. All right, keep on plugging. All right. One of the other things he said they launched a bunch of times and no one noticed, so they kept launching early on. And I think that's important because you hear guys like Alex Hormozy say all the time, no one knows who you are. And it's very important for you to continue to talk to people about your company, to put things on social media about your company, because everyone has a million things going on. And so them knowing who you are is probably a 1% chance. And so the only people that are really going to know who you are your friends, family, or people who've used your product. I think that's important to understand is back then, when in the beginning of like the internet and booming and times where things were booming on the internet, people didn't know who they were and they launched a bunch of times, and that's okay. I don't think I've ever done like a huge launch, but I think there will be times where I could see like us doing a big event at the Olympics or the World Cup or something like that, where hopefully we get a lot of people on, but people may not notice, and that's okay. We can still continue to build over time and launch and launch and launch. All right. There's only 3 more stories that I really liked, or I liked a bunch, but I had to narrow it down to these. One of the things he said was the enemy of a startup is everyone else's life. And what does that mean? When you are trying to start a company, it is something that is probably going to be a side job. It's going to be something that people have a main job that they do that makes actual money in the short term. And then you do this side thing that you are excited about. But if you have 2 or 3 people trying to do this, everybody's life comes into play. And when you try to get together to work on this side thing, a lot of times things come up and people can't be there. Only 2 of you could be there, or only 1 of you could be there. Or maybe when all 3 of you do get there, you can only be there for a short amount of time to work on it. And I thought it's so true about the enemy of a startup is everyone's life. What happens when you're younger and probably in your early 20s, you don't have as many obligations and your priority list of things that you have to do are not as long. So to start a company when you're younger is probably very advantageous because you can go all in on something because you don't have a lot that you have to pay for in your life. And so if you're really young, 2 things that you should probably remember is if you do have a normal job that you have to do 24/7, it's going to be difficult. And you also want to have a social life outside of that. It's going to be difficult for you to get 1 or 2 other people to want to do this side thing with you that care about it as much as you do. Or maybe one of the guys cares about it more than you. I have a story where a buddy of mine, or 2 friends of mine actually in the time, this was about 9 years ago at this point, we started a land buying business. And we did it on the side because we were all active duty military. And so we would meet up at a grocery store and work on this thing. And it lasted probably like 6 months to a year. And then we worked in the same, like right next to each other in the same cubicles. And so we got to talk to each other a bunch, but it didn't really go anywhere because all 3 of us just didn't really go all in on it. We thought it'd be fun to like flip land because we heard of people doing it, and a friend of ours has really successful at it. We were like, oh yeah, we can do this. And then about 6 months to a year later, we were like, all right, we need to fold this thing up, and we pretty much did that. That's my take on starting a business as you're trying to have a normal job as well. It's going to be very difficult. So just know that going into it. And if you're going to start a business on the side, have some sort of parameters where you're like, okay, we're going to meet at least once a week for like an hour or 2 or 3 hours or something. And you have to make it a continuous thing. You have to build off of that. Brian said helped them out a lot was that they got admitted to Y Combinator and they got to do this. I think it was for like 6 months. It was either 4 or 6 months or something like that. Maybe it was a year. It might've been, it might've been 3 months. I'm the timing, but he said the awesome thing about this was for those, I think it was 3 months from 8 a.m. to midnight, they worked like crazy people on this job, on this company. And they all were able to do that because Y Combinator allowed them to come together and do that and put 3 months of effort towards it. So that's one thing I'd also say is if you're thinking about doing something, I would say, Y Combinator has a lot of resources and connections and stuff. So it's probably different. But if you really want to give it a go, it's going to take very concerted, focused effort for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3, 4 years. If you really want to get this, if you really are passionate about making that company work. Okay. And you can do it on the side for a very long time. That's not saying it's not going to work. And honestly, if you have a family, if you have a lot of obligations, if you can't just go all in on a company, do it as a side project. And if you build it up enough to where it becomes your main thing, then you can start doing that full time. And then you can go all in on it. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but I liked how Brian expressed that everyone else's life is going to play in the role of you trying to do this startup. And so if you all have different things going on, it's going to be very hard to make it work. But if you only have this one thing going on and you're trying to make it work, it's going to be a lot better. All right. Last 2 things that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed a lot of his stuff. Like I said, go watch him. But he said, better to have 100 people love you than 1,000 people like you. And that's what Paul Graham said. And do things that don't scale. And for me, and I think a lot of other people, is we want to scale as fast as we can usually, because that usually means more revenue, more dollars, more likelihood that we're going to stay around and stick around. But what he said makes a lot of sense and is something you should focus on, because he said that if you make 100 people love you, then they're going to tell other people about your product for the rest of their life, probably, if they really love your product and really enjoy it, instead of 1,000 people liking you. Because if they just like you and they don't really love the product, they're probably not going to tell their friends and family about what you're doing. And so when you have 100 people marketing your product for you, that's a lot of people marketing for you. So try to and I try to do this. I don't think I'm the best at it. I've definitely tried to invest in my time into people that I truly care about, and then also think that are going to benefit from this Flybody stuff the most. But I definitely get into a loop of I want to get as many customers as possible and try to make that the best. Now, I think I have around 15 schools now that I can focus on and try to make those schools absolutely love Flybodies, or make 100 people from those schools love Flybodies, and then they'll tell other people. So we'll try to do that. And then also do things that don't scale. I think a lot of times people focus on the digital and apps and things that scale really fast. This tends to prevent you from doing things that are modable. Meaning, if you are able to take care of a client one-on-one very well, and you're not going to be able to do that for 1,000 other clients, that's okay. You could probably do it for another maybe 10, 12, or 10, 20, 30 people. But that's the big thing, is like a lot of times people don't want to do things that don't scale, because you're like, we're not going to be able to do this for 100 people. We're not going to be able to do this for 1,000 people. But you'd start to figure out what are the scalable parts of the things you're doing and what means the most, so that you can keep doing those things. And then the last thing that I'll talk about is online to offline. I heard Brian talk about this concept of online to offline. And what does that mean? In the Asian market, things that really took off were things that you could buy online or navigate online, but you could do offline, like you could do in person. And I see in Airbnb is that thing. You can book a room online. You can use their app to book, a place to stay, but then you actually go there in person. And I think that's a very, very sticky business to try and build, because the scalable portion is the online portion, and then the offline portion allows people to experience that thing in person, and it makes it more meaningful over time. So online to offline, I think that concept is really good, because from a Flybody standpoint, we do these mileage challenges. They're all digital on our phone and virtual, but then we actually can come to the school and do these workouts in person, and I can do presentations in person. We can sit down with people in person and stuff like that. So I think that's important, and I really like that, him talking about online to offline. So that's all I got, guys. Brian Chesky's the man. Go listen to his podcast, the one he did at Stanford, and then also the one he did with Lenny, and you'll learn a lot. So Brian Chesky, thank you so much for everything you've done, and thanks for being a positive influencer. Get after it.